Hello, welcome to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Show. Today I'm super excited because we have Michael back. Michael, I know probably everybody knows you from the show, but please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Heike. So my name is Mike Melone. I'm a principal security researcher on the Microsoft Defender Experts-XDR team.
So yeah, and you're my favorite threat hunter that I could have asked to join that show, obviously. So Michael, we are going to talk about, yes, how does a day in a life of a SOC analyst look like? How would you explain this to me?
Absolutely. So the challenge with working as a SOC is you've got a lot of competing priorities. There's always something new to look at. The challenge is figuring out what to prioritize and to be most effective from a time management perspective, from a security impact perspective. We also want to look at, the organization security. And then if possible, you want to also focus on the continuous improvement of the entire organization's security operations system. So in other words, contributing back into intellectual property for your organization that helps you hunt things more efficiently, more effectively in the future. So there's a whole bunch of different things you got to kind of pay attention to.
So even though I might assume that there is, of course, a few variables that are different from customer to customer, maybe even segment to segment, size to size, but there's also a few things that should be done and are important for any size of organization. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Exactly what you identified is the reason that threat hunting has to exist regardless. So we can detect all kinds of great stuff with the Defender stack. But every organization is different. You have different priorities. You have different assets in your organization that are more important than others. And the threats and the normal operation of your business is going to be different from other businesses. So threat hunting is really taking the security domain knowledge that you've got in your head and applying it to your unique organization's needs. Sometimes you got to expose something a little bit more and you need to tune your detections around that particular type of asset. Sometimes for your organization, something is even more important, so you need to tune your detections in that manner. And that's exactly the reason that we do this threat hunting, overhunting, and customized vulnerability management.
And this is also something that you do on a daily basis, right? So you work on the Defender Expert for XDR team?
Absolutely. So the Defender Experts for XDR team and the Defender Experts for Hunting team both do overhunting over the customer's environment. So there's a couple of challenges you run into with threat hunting. The first one is time that the detection is published. Sometimes something is brand new. Nobody's seen the domain before. You might be the very first or one of the first targets using this particular technique. So it takes a second for detection logic to catch up with it. This is the reason that Defender Experts for Hunting exists a lot, is to cover that gap. So I kind of retro hunt over the environment and look for latent threats that may not have been detected at the time that they occurred because the signature may not be ready after that particular threat. There's also a lot of general overhunting recommendations, things that you can't really quantify as an alert, but you kind of put a bunch of pieces together and you say, okay, this is a web server. We've got a domain admin credential being exposed to it. We probably want to tell the customer that you don't want to use highly privileged accounts on a web exposed asset. Or maybe we identify overprivileged scenarios where a service could probably run with less permission and the way it's running is a potential risk to the organization. So these are some of the things that we try to highlight in Defender Experts for XDR to give the customer some insight and the ability to move forward confidently in their operations.
So, of course, you just mentioned it, right? So there is a device that might be a domain controller, that might be a web server, there might be credentials like accessing it that have high privileges. Is that something that the portal gives me right away? Or is this already something that you would say, hey, you see, there is, I don't know, a vulnerability on a web server. So now you need to go hunt and search for more things that are important to understand before you do something?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the portal gives you a bunch of great stuff in Defender vulnerability management, especially. Let's go ahead and pivot over to the portal. Let's look around inside, see what we can find. So there's a few different things you want to kind of pay attention to, especially from a vulnerability and configuration management perspective. Defender's vulnerability management capability, we'll go over here to the dashboard, gives you a really good oversight into overall vulnerabilities that are out there. And you're kind of comparing really two main things from this perspective. One is, are things configured properly, i.e. they're able to defend against a threat because you've got your best security configuration for that particular application, that operating system, et cetera. And there's also the weaknesses or vulnerabilities in software, which imply that, if an adversary was to identify this vulnerability and have the ability to access it, they could potentially circumvent it regardless of what control you put in place. And when I say that, they have to still have the ability to touch the software, obviously, in order to exploit it. And it has to be the right kind of vulnerability. So let's go ahead and take a look under weaknesses real quick. Now, mind you, this is a small lab environment. It's meant for demonstration. This is not really a great representation of a 10,000, 20,000 seat organization. In this small lab environment, we've got 412 vulnerabilities out there, and we've got a couple of different ways that we can sort them. We can look at them based on if there's a known exploit that's publicly available. If there's an adversary that's currently using it, we might see this little target get lit up. The other thing to pay attention to is the CVSS, or the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, which tells you how bad it is. And this comes from a number of different factors, such as how is it accessible? In other words, is it locally exploitable? Is it network exploitable? What permissions does it yield when it's exploited, et cetera? Now, there's another layer that you might want to dig into when you're looking at this, which is how relevant is this particular vulnerability to my specific scenario? So, for example, if I have a web exploitable vulnerability on a device that is internal only, has no internet access, and it's only because of firewalls or routing or VPNs or whatnot, it's very limited from an accessibility perspective to maybe only people who are inside the network. You might want to rank that one lower than a similar vulnerability that's on something that's public facing, or maybe that vulnerability on a system that has highly sensitive data or has regular exposure to admin credentials. So maybe like a jump server, domain controller, somewhere you're doing authentication, somewhere where authorization is granted inside your enterprise. So one of the neat things you can do, I'm going to pop over to advanced hunting real quick. You can actually pivot this based on the information inside your organization. So for example, we can take a look at vulnerabilities that are on internet-facing devices, for example. So by taking the device info table and pivoting on where is internet-facing, it's going to let me know that these particular devices are facing the internet. And then I'm going to bring up the TVM software vulnerabilities to figure out what vulnerabilities are on those devices. And instead of looking at 412 off the top of my head, I'm now looking at 26. And you can use this with other pivots as well, looking for powerful admin accounts, maybe sensitive information on these particular devices, and use that to kind of stack rank what you say is important to your particular organization from a vulnerability management perspective.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And of course, you can go wild and combine and join the different tables and information that you want to get as a result. And of course, this is now, you look into vulnerabilities, misconfiguration, and what's really important for your organization. But there's the other side, which is you have an alert or you have an incident. So how do you go with that? Because yes, it's a lab environment, but even in that, I would be scared looking at it because there's a lot of incidents, there's a lot of alerts. How do you prioritize those? And how do you, navigate there?
Sure. So there's a couple different angles. So let's take a step over to the in-product alerts. We provide a pretty good picture of what the severity of a particular event is from the alert level, and that trickles up into the incident level and gives you the ability to prioritize these types of activities. So if we can see we have a multi-stage activity, we've ranked this one high. We've also got the Defender Experts tag on there, which means this is a Defender Experts customer, and we're going to start taking a look at, and in some cases, responding to the threats automatically, depending on the configuration of the tenant. Obviously, first things first, in normal day-to-day SOC work, this is your priority, because these are the threats that are knocking at your door. These are the adversaries who are trying to fish their way into your organization, steal credentials. This might be an initial footprint. This might be an exploitation of one of the vulnerabilities that we just talked about previously in vulnerability management. So this kind of takes priority over everything. The neat thing here, though, is that going back to this customization for your particular environment, these are the out-of-the-box capabilities. You're also going to have some stuff that you're going to define that's specific to your organization. And this is kind of that whole security continuous improvement cycle. Right now, I would say focus on the alerts and incidents. But then when you get to the point where the alerts and incidents that remain are either very low priority, are all resolved, or you have maybe you have some free resources in your security operations center, kind of the next thing to do is kind of overhunting and looking over your organization, looking for things that are maybe not product detections, because sometimes the concepts that we would be looking for may be tailored to a specific organization, their mission, their specific identities, etc.
Oh, you have specific threat intelligence that you use, that you want to include, right?
The important thing when you're starting to perform threat hunting inside your organization, you want to kind of focus on ensuring you have a good return on investment. You want to make sure your time is used effectively because there's a ton of data inside Defender. You got to make sure you're getting your money's worth, if you will, out of your time that you're spending performing this task. So I have this concept I call the detection funnel, which kind of helps you prioritize what types of detections to perform in what order, based on your free time and based on what level you're currently at in your organization. The highest fidelity, the best return on investment is going to be some sort of a validated indicator of attack or indicator of compromise. This is going to be either a product alert. This might be a custom detection, maybe a Sentinel analytic rule that you guys wrote in-house based on previous events that you've observed inside your organization. So those are always where you want to spend your time first. Close that queue of anything that's high, medium severity, and obviously overhunt over your lows and informational. Make sure you got good coverage for those type of things. The next one in the funnel is going to be threat intelligence. This is not to imply that threat intelligence is lower value, but it's going to include a lot of things that you may not have observed inside your organization. This could be either third-party threat intelligence, first-party from your own investigations, Defender threat intelligence, but this is going to be the IPs, hashes, domain names, URLs that you're getting fed from whatever feeds you currently subscribe to or have available. Below that, we start getting into the customs, where you're starting to develop new intellectual property for your organization. So pattern-based detections, behavioral-based detections, anomaly-based detections. So a pattern-based detection is looking for something sort of suspicious. You may not know it's malicious, but for example, if you wanted to identify a specific, maybe you want to look for applications like shell applications, like maybe PowerShell or something that's going to a suspicious looking website, or maybe you want to pivot on on what types of, like, a certain set of websites you want to dig into to see if there's anything potentially malicious associated with that activity. So that would be a potential pattern where you're trying to look for in, like, the launch string or in the network connection, maybe this process paired with this specific destination, maybe the geolocation of a remote IP address might be of interest to your organization. Mm-hmm. That would be a pattern. Behavioral is sort of focusing on pairing together a known and looking for things that are unknown. So for example, this process always network connects to these particular destinations. This user always performs this particular action. If you have a baseline you can work off of, you can filter your results, so you can focus on filtering out all the knowns and focus on the unknowns. The lowest tier of the detection funnel is the anomaly tier. An anomaly tier is basically everything else. This is looking for things that by statistically never happen in your organization. This process never launches this condition never happens. This never happens at this hour of the day. That is your lower return on investment scenarios, because while it's the most fun and you will find some really interesting stuff, you've got the problem of the long tail, they call it, in statistics, which is there are a ton of anomalies in any organization of any size.
So, Michael, this is amazing, this funnel. Can you show us a few examples of how you actually go down that funnel?
Yeah, let's pop into advanced hunting and check it out. I'm going to skip over our IOA and IOC detections and threat intelligence detections because those are pretty straightforward. You're going to be looking for a hash, an IP address, or you're going to be looking at the alerts that came out of the box. Let's focus on the stuff that's going to be a little more custom for the organization, like starting at like a pattern detection. So first off, let's say the hypothesis is, I know I've seen evidence of malicious software doing direct connections out to GitHub. So we want to take a look at what processes in my environment that are not web browser processes went to GitHub. This might be an automated way of downloading something and executing in the system. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the network connections where the process is not Edge, Chrome, Firefox, Opera. Also, we know that Git, the software, will go out to GitHub. So we're not too worried about that. Mm-hmm. And there's an updater for some software that will go out to GitHub. So we'll filter those out and look to see where the remote URL says GitHub in it. And when we kick this off, we're going to find out that we, in fact, have an interesting PowerShell script here. So this device, AVORIAZ, it has PowerShell.exe running a script, C scripts, webnav.ps1 that goes out to GitHub on a regular basis. Now, the question becomes, is this malicious or is this benign? Mm-hmm. At this point in time, we don't really have an indication that this is a malicious or benign. We're going to need to dig into that cscripts webnav.ps1 script on the system to figure out what it is. But ultimately, you may find something that's out there. But notice that we got a pretty decent return. So in this case, we only brought back 9 rows on 7 days worth of data in this lab environment. Obviously, it's going to be larger in a production environment, and you're going to have a lot more noise. But if you're smart with the way you write your pattern detection queries, you shouldn't have a ton of rows. If you get a ton of rows in this type of query, you probably need to add more filters.
So you would basically now, of course, continue the investigation. As you said, you would go into the script and you would look what the script is doing. But you would not have seen for now an alert on this specific activity, because usually PowerShell accessing GitHub is not malicious per se, right? So it's for you something that you would like to see or like understand for you, this organization.
Exactly. Yeah. So the thing is you have to, so this is the whole point of this is to custom tune things based on how your organization operates. If we focus solely on if we can't write a product alert saying PowerShell going to GitHub is bad, because there's a lot of legitimate reasons that PowerShell can go to GitHub, and every organization is different. If we made an alert on every single one of those, people would never get done with their queue, and they would probably be very angry at the signal to noise ratio of the things that we produce as a product. And that's the fundamental problem you get into with threat hunting, is you are kind of tuning it to your organization. You may have a policy that nothing, the PowerShell can't go to any web address, for example, depending on how strict, how secure your organization is. And that may be a violation of that, and that may be a hypothesis that led you to run that query.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the bottom of the funnel now, where we're going to have a lower return on investment and kind of dig into some techniques you can use around that. I'm going to take a look at the very most basic type of anomaly detection, which is like a statistical anomaly detection. So in this case, we're going to look at processes, and we're going to figure out how many different devices ran a specific process command line. So how many different devices ran this one specific command line per command line. We're going to then filter it out. We have to set a threshold because we don't want to see every device ran this. Not really worried about that. You're looking for something that's a statistical anomaly right now. So we're going to reduce that to only command lines that ran on less than 5 different devices inside the organization. Bring it back with the original data and then sort it based on how many machines ran that command in the last 7 days right now. So we'll go ahead and run this. This is going to take a little bit longer, because we're going to do a join in here. And notice a difference here. This time we got 10,000 results back, which is the max you're going to get in your advanced hunting web UI. And this is kind of showing you the difference in return on investment. The further you go down that detection funnel, the lower the return on investment. So, and let me show you an example here. So note that these are all, by the way, these commands each ran only on one device inside the organization. So these are all technically anomalies, and some of them could be interesting, some of them not. That I was talking about before, the tail problem. Let's just go ahead and visualize it real quick. So the tail problem is showing you, we're going to take, let me switch this to actually process command line. So that matches our query above. And we're going to go ahead and take a look and see what the distribution is of the number of one-offs from 2-offs, 3-offs, and 4-offs. So we can see we have 19 machines, looks like, inside the environment. But look at the sheer size of how many things only existed on one machine in 7 days. And this is why you have to be super efficient. In fact, we can just do with y-axis log, just so we can kind of see a better distribution here. We'll do a log axis on this. And even then, we still can't see, because there's only 252 instances where 2 machines ran the same command line. And that's kind of showing you the challenge you've got when you're trying to do this threat hunting. It is in the anomaly at the bottom of the funnel, it is inherently lower ROI than doing something like behavioral pattern signature, like IOA, IOC type detections.
That's why it's luckily at the very end of it.
Exactly. You want to make sure you focus on the things that are going to be tied to some known threat actor, TTP.
Yes.
You're going to have something tied to threat intelligence. Focus on that before you start getting into the pure anomaly type detections, because your time's going to be used a lot more wisely.
Yeah, I mean, even though it looks like fun and going there, but I think, as you said, like, it's also the time. Like, how much time do you have? And you need to focus on the most important things very much on top.
And for this is something that you might do once a week if you have some free hours. If you have a few free hours, the queue is quiet. Maybe it's a Friday where we tend to see less alerts on Fridays. I'm not sure why, but maybe that's a Friday type task where you have, you've got your vulnerability management stuff in check. You've got your daily alerts and investigations. Things are kind of humming along. No big problem there. Just kind of peek around the environment and see what you find out there. And that might be the basis of a new detection.
How do you use a lot of advanced hunting? You use the tool. You mentioned analytics rules and Sentinel. So how are all these things coming together for you?
Yeah, so this is all part of having a continuous improvement process. So we've got a concept that we like to talk about called hypothesis-driven threat hunting. And basically what you have is, it's sort of like applying the scientific method to the threat hunting domain. You start out with a hypothesis. What is the likelihood that a specific threat actor is in the environment? What's the likelihood that something is being abused? You got to come into it with a question of some sort. And then you come up with one or more different queries on the data that you have to prove or disprove that condition. So when you're looking for storm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in your environment, you need to have a set of indicators that storm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 might be there. If you want to know what is the possibility that somebody's abusing PowerShell to perform remote command and control, you're going to come up with a number of different queries that can ultimately be used to prove or disprove it. And depending on what you find, you want to take that and roll that right back into your custom detections, your analytic rules, all your notebooks perhaps, to try and investigate these scenarios in the future more efficiently. Maybe even create automatic alerts. That way in the future, you don't have to go through that process anymore. And ultimately what you end up doing is you build up this cache of really good detections that are custom tuned for the things that your particular organization is interested in.
The topic was basically the day in the life of a SOC analyst. Of course, you go down the funnel, so it can change any day. There is no, this is always what you do in this day, right? I mean, it can change any day. Plus, you might also consider looking at the vulnerability dashboard that we showed before, and there's something super important, and it might be more important than solving the second incident in the queue. So how do you go there as a customer? I'm just trying to understand for myself. Wow, I have no clue about threat hunting, but imagine someone would hire me as a threat hunter and they sit me in front of a console and say, fix it, make it good. So is it, there is no really like this, those are the daily tasks and those are the weekly tasks. Is it so complicated because it depends and it changes?
So it depends a lot on how much free time you have in your organization. And it depends on how advanced an organization you are, how proactive the organization is from a security perspective. Now, some organizations are going to have a lot of noise. They're going to onboard Defender. They're going to get tons and tons of alerts. This is where you get into like needing suppression is a common scenario, right? Are these false positives or these benign positives, i.e., sure, the detection is correct, but we don't care about it in this scenario because maybe this is a vulnerability scanner inside the enterprise. So trying to tune and get to high fidelity detections for the stuff that's already in the box. Yeah. The other thing you're getting, you also have, as I mentioned, the vulnerability management side of the house. So you want to make sure you keep your vulnerabilities under control, and you want to do so relative to the relative risk of that particular asset that is vulnerable. As well as keeping an eye on your overall roadmap from a security hardening perspective. The alert tuning and suppression side of the house is pretty much a day-to-day task because you're going to come across an alert. You're going to say, I've seen this 3 times. It's always a false positive. Let's go ahead and suppress this one. From a vulnerability management perspective, some organizations have a dedicated vulnerability management team. Other ones are a little bit smaller organizations, and everybody kind of does maybe the SOC team does the vulnerability management in-house. So depending on your organization, I would say weekly to monthly is probably a good cadence for keeping an eye on the vulnerabilities. And I say that only because we have a monthly patching cycle, and most organizations have a release cycle that's going to be, it's not going to be every single day new codes coming out. New vulnerabilities will be coming out, and you should probably keep abreast of anything that shows up as public exploitable or anything that shows up as having a known adversary exploiting a specific vulnerability. That's a different story. So obviously keeping your eye on the news and reprioritizing based on that is going to be super important. The other thing, sort of like working on the detection side of the house, is kind of what you do when you have that free time after you've beaten the queue down. Is you don't have a whole bunch of active alerts in the queue. You have a plan to address the critical vulnerabilities of the organization. That's when you start really having the time to kind of drill into that, creating that intellectual property, automation, and hopefully getting into automating as much as possible the handling of these investigations inside the enterprise.
So I think it's also something it's a circle, like, right? I would assume, yes, of course, keep up with the news, but not just the news, what's currently attacking the world, but also product news. Maybe I just do like a little amplification, aka.ms/defender news. So you learn what are the latest features that you can use that can help you get your job faster done, but also maybe for something that you have let's say a workbook written or something that is not necessary in the end, or there is new features that you might want to configure from a security configuration perspective, that I don't know if they're maybe not turned on by default or something. So that's basically you need to continuously look into, incidents alerts, but also the whole set of configuration and features that are there, right? To keep them secure.
Yeah, as new features come out, you want to make sure we're always keeping abreast of the latest capabilities of the product. We're shipping new features to help secure devices every release, I should say. So you want to make sure you're aware of those, and the nice thing is our secure score will help reflect that, help a customer prioritize that, so that they can focus on the ones that we're recommending the most based on their current situation.
Yeah. And you mentioned it, right? So if there is a high severity alert and you go into it and you look at an incident, you go into the alerts, they will tell you that this is related because of a CVE on a device. So this is already part of it. But then if you have some spare time, check out, even if it's, of course, on a daily basis, the vulnerabilities, the weaknesses, the dashboard, how you're doing. Are you going down? Are you going up? So that's why we put those visuals in there to actually show someone the impact of the work that they're doing on a daily basis. What is the last advice that you can give to people that might just start, or people that are more experienced, but it's a lot to do. So what's your advice?
Absolutely. So there's a few things. So obviously time management is kind of a key theme around here. Make sure you focus on things that are going to return for your organization. Use the Defender out-of-box alerts, the Defender vulnerability management capabilities to identify risks out there, but also make sure you kind of put your own spin on it relative to your organization's specific needs and from a security perspective. But at the same time, make sure you set some time aside, maybe a few hours a week, to kind of look over the environment and look for things that are out of sorts. They're abnormal relative to the environment. So you want to look for those anomalies, because ultimately, the more standardized an environment is, the higher fidelity your alerts and the more efficient your SOC is going to be. If you've got a bunch of random stuff, you want to try and tame that and make things as consistent as possible. If you want to really get into threat hunting and stuff, definitely check out, I've got a series from back when at aka.ms/tracking the adversary. So if you want to get into some of the KQL we were talking about in this, we have a great four-part series on that. And obviously, stay tuned to the Ninja Show for the latest awesome product things that are coming out as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. It was a pleasure having you back. And I hope I will have you again on the show. We can always talk about things, I know, but you're busy hunting the bad guys. But for now, thank you very much, Michael. And thanks everyone for watching. See you soon.